This documentary examines a real missing person case involving alleged abuse, investigative controversy, and years of unanswered questions. No graphic details are described. Viewer discretion is advised. She left home for school. She never came back. And for years, the system treated it like a mystery that would quietly fade away. But one voice refused to let it disappear. This is the case of Alissa Turney, a cold case, forced back into the spotlight by family, pressure, and the internet. On May 17, 2001, 17-year-old Alissa Turney left her home in Phoenix, Arizona, to attend Paradise Valley High School. It was the last day of her junior year, a day filled with the usual end-of school buzz. She was captured on campus surveillance footage that afternoon, but after she left, she vanished. There were no confirmed sightings of her ever again. Back at her family home, everything seemed normal. Her belongings were left behind, her car still parked where she left it. When evening came and Alissa hadn't returned, her family reported her missing. Initially, investigators approached the case with a common assumption for teenagers, a possible runaway. This theory was supported by the fact that Alissa had recently argued with her stepfather, Michael Turney. She had also expressed a desire for more independence to her friends, talking about wanting to move out and live on her own. This runaway narrative, while plausible on the surface, would come to define and limit the scope of the investigation for years, steering it away from darker possibilities that were brewing just beneath the surface. Critical early hours, often the most vital in a missing persons case, ticked by with this assumption guiding every decision. The runaway theory didn't just guide the investigation, it dominated it. As a result, the initial search efforts were limited. There was no widespread urgent hunt for a potentially abducted teen. Media attention was minimal, and Alissa's face didn't become a fixture on nightly news broadcasts. The critical window of the first 48 hours passed without the intensity an abduction case would normally trigger. What investigators did not fully explore at the time were the deeper, more troubling concerns about Alissa's home life. These weren't just vague rumors. They were specific allegations Alissa had privately shared with friends and even school counselors. These claims were documented, written down, in official records. Yet, for reasons that remain controversial, they were not fully pursued. The focus remained fixed on the idea of a rebellious teenager who had simply walked away, overshadowing the red flags that pointed to a far more dangerous situation. The home Alissa shared with her stepfather, Michael Turney, was a place of secrets. Michael, a former law enforcement officer, was known for his strong opinions about authority and his need for control over his family. As years went by and the case was re-examined, a disturbing picture of the household began to emerge. Evidence surfaced that suggested a volatile and oppressive environment. This evidence included secretly recorded conversations, diary entries from Alissa detailing her fears and frustrations, and harrowing claims of long-term emotional and psychological abuse. At the time of her disappearance, however, this information was fragmented. Different people held different pieces of the puzzle: friends, counselors, family members, but these pieces were never assembled by law enforcement into a single, cohesive, investigative picture. This failure to connect the dots allowed the secrets of the Turney household to remain buried, while Alissa's case grew colder with each passing day. As months turned into years, Alissa Turney's case stagnated. With no new leads, no confirmed sightings, and no clear direction, the investigation ground to a halt. There was no arrest. The case file was eventually moved from an active investigation to the cold case unit, becoming another tragic story of a missing teenager filed away in storage. For the outside world, Alissa's disappearance faded from public consciousness, but inside her family, the silence was deafening. The unanswered questions only grew louder and more painful with time. The official narrative of a runaway teen never sat right with those who knew Alissa best, and the lack of resolution left a wound that refused to heal. The system had moved on, but for her loved ones, the search for answers was just beginning. One person who could never accept the silence was Sarah Turney, Alissa's younger sister. She grew up in the shadow of her sister's disappearance, surrounded by a fog of unanswered questions and unresolved grief. As she grew into an adult, she decided that if the authorities wouldn't find the answers, she would. Sarah launched her own investigation, becoming a tireless advocate for her sister. She filed public records requests, poring over thousands of pages of police files. She tracked down and interviewed witnesses herself. Recognizing the power of modern media, she started a podcast and launched social media campaigns dedicated to Alissa's case. Her TikTok videos went viral, bringing Alissa's story to a new generation. The picture she painted was deeply troubling, highlighting not only potential criminal behavior, but also significant investigative blind spots and failures. As online attention surged, public pressure mounted on law enforcement to take another look. Authorities were forced to respond to a case they had long considered closed. Under the bright glare of renewed public scrutiny, investigators in Arizona were compelled to re-examine the evidence in Alissa Turney's disappearance. The pressure campaign led by Sarah Turney had worked. Old files were dusted off, and witnesses were re-interviewed. This renewed focus eventually led to action. Michael Turney was arrested and charged, but initially, not for anything related to Alissa's disappearance. He was convicted on unrelated weapons charges stemming from a search of his home. Later, as more evidence was pieced together, prosecutors took the major step of charging him with second-degree murder. However, building a murder case without a body and without definitive forensic proof is an enormous legal challenge. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial. In 2023, after a trial, a judge dismissed the charges, citing a lack of sufficient evidence for a jury to convict. Alissa's disappearance officially remains unresolved. The dismissal of charges left a void filled with more questions than answers. Why was the runaway theory prioritized so heavily in the beginning, despite evidence pointing to problems at home? Were Alissa's own documented allegations of abuse minimized or ignored? Did Michael Turney's background as a former law enforcement officer shield him from deeper scrutiny in the early stages of the investigation? And perhaps the most pressing question of all, would this case have remained forgotten in a cold case file forever, without the relentless family-led pressure campaign that forced it back into the light? Alissa Turney is still missing, her family is still waiting, and the truth, after all these years, remains just out of reach. A painful testament to a case that is far from closed. Cold cases don't stay cold because the questions disappear. They stay cold because the answers are never pursued with enough urgency and persistence. Alissa Turney's case is a powerful and ongoing reminder of this truth. It demonstrates that a single voice, amplified by community and technology, can reopen doors that institutions have closed. It shows that silence and inaction can be challenged, and that the official story is not always the whole story. Sometimes, the loudest and most effective force for justice comes not from a badge or a courtroom, but from the unwavering love of family. Subscribe to Criminal Verse, where every crime hides a story.